That's fine.
Yeah,
So I'll introduce myself and then I'll introduce the organization that I work for. So my name is Vikas Mangipudi. I'm the loan officer for Vermont and New Hampshire at the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, also known as CFNE, formerly known as the Cooperative Fund of New England. We're what's called a CDFI, a Cooperative Development Finance Institution. We're a loan fund, a mission-driven nonprofit loan fund that supports cooperatives throughout New England and upstate New York, which is why we're up the Northeast and not New England. So CFNE as an organization has been around since 1972, originally supporting the growth of food co-ops as they were being formed and trying to grow throughout New England. In the intervening 50 years or so, we've grown to support co-ops of all stripes. We're currently about a $50 million loan fund, and we'll fund projects as small as $10,000 or $20,000 or as big as $2 million. We'll also partner with other organizations, both lending organizations that are CDFIs, as well as banks and credit unions and other folks sort of in this broader cooperative movement to do a lot of different projects. So right now, about a third, closer to 40% of our lending is still to food co-ops, so consumer-owned retail businesses, primarily larger community-owned, consumer-owned businesses. About 40% of our lending these days is to worker co-ops, and that's where a lot of the overlap with the Vermont Employee Ownership Center comes in. We will finance worker co-ops that are startups. We'll finance small worker co-ops that were started as worker co-ops. We'll also finance a lot of conversions. Again, that's a particular area of interest with VEOC. Oftentimes, we are one of the lenders that will step in to work on behalf of and alongside the members of a worker co-op as they purchase a business from an outgoing owner.
Really, that's such a great introduction. I love how you explained sort of like the profile of the client, and also like the different sectors. Like originally it was like food co-ops, but now you're covering quite a wide spectrum. And
the same, actually.
Also say the loan amount. What did you forget?
Yeah. So 40 plus 40 is 80, not 100. So 40% of our lending generally goes to food co-ops, 40% goes to worker co-ops, and the last 20% is miscellaneous co-ops, primarily housing related. Some other projects. Yeah, and with the housing co-ops in particular, we see a lot of interest around mobile home park conversions, especially in Vermont and New Hampshire. Both states have a statute that require that anyone selling a mobile home park must notify the residents and allow for a first right of refusal. So the residents have a different amount of times, usually 60 or 90 days, to put together a financing package to purchase their mobile home park and run it as a co-op. So we do step in to finance those as well. There's a number of other much larger partners that do great work, including the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, ROC NH, and ROC USA, which is the Resident Owned Communities USA organization. They really fund a ton of these. We're a small player that will step in to fill a need or a gap, or after a conversion, we'll step in to finance infrastructure improvements or help these ROCs succeed in the long run.
So would you want to explain a little bit on, let's say there is someone out there, a business owner, maybe it's in thinking about the silver tsunami and how it is here. Last time I was speaking to Vikas and I was saying are we experiencing the silver tsunami or not? And for those who don't know, the silver tsunami is in reference to the baby boomers, which is like 65 and above, who are now entering into retirement and are sort of ready to exit their businesses. So in thinking about that, let's say there is someone who's out there, a business owner, who's thinking of the different options that they have. Should they sell their business to private equity, or should they rather looking like at a partnership and and so on. Why would they, if they are sort of, let's say, convinced, maybe their values already speak to wanting to empower and share the wealth with their workers. So if they are looking at transitioning to becoming a worker co-op, which is like 40% of what you're funding currently, what would you sort of say, what's the advantage of coming to work with CFNE? What are some of the benefits? And depending on the loan size, I'm sure there are different ways of looking at their options. How would you advise someone in that position? In terms of the benefits of using CDFI, and what are they looking into?
Sure. So let's talk about worker ownership conversions.
Yes, first.
So there's a huge demographic shift that we're in the middle of, that we've been in the middle of for a few years now, where retiring folks of the sort of baby boomer generation are they're all reaching retirement age and looking for what's next. So one of the demographics that we work with a lot, one of the sets of things that we work with a lot are employee ownership conversions. And employee ownership makes sense for a lot of reasons. Not just, employee ownership makes sense for a lot of reasons, not just because of a mission fit. So once again, I cover Vermont and New Hampshire, and one of the really delightful differences between them, one of the things that I really like about working in Vermont is employee ownership isn't some weird hippie thing here. It's just normal. If you're an outgoing business owner, talk to your friends, talk to your other small business owners, talk to your golfing buddies. You probably know someone in your social circle that's either been through an employee ownership conversion, or is considering it, or has talked to the folks at Vermont Employee Ownership Center, or has at some point been involved in this process. It takes some doing. Selling to your employees is very rarely the fastest or easiest way to exit a business, but it can be some of the most long-lasting and successful and really impactful ways of exiting your business. Employee ownership is also a great option. Say you're a retiring small business owner and your kids don't want the business. Yes. You're not sure how to maintain that business in a way that'll continue to employ the folks that you've worked with for years or decades even, but you know that they know the business and you trust them to run it. It's never the fastest or easiest because it takes some work. You have to make sure that all the things that you as a business owner are doing in your head are sort of written down, passed on to the next folks. It takes planning, it takes execution. But if you have the right team around you, it can be really, really impactful. And it provides an opportunity for folks to build wealth in a way that a lot of other opportunities, or that there aren't a lot of other opportunities of the same magnitude.
But is it still rewarding? Because I feel like some of the fears with business owners is surrounding, you want to also exit and retire, right? Knowing that you've been working all this while and you're going to retire well. So does the model itself or the strategy of worker co-ops or employee ownership actually meet that goal as well? And in the case of CFNE, how do you assist in making sure that that is achieved?
Yeah, so it really comes down to, do you trust your employees? If you trust that the employees that you have in your business are skilled and have the ability to think both strategically and operationally about the business, or can learn, then yes, it can be a fantastic option. So CFNE, the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, we come in kind of late in the conversion process, actually. So typically, the conversion process can take years, and it really, the pace is set by the business. So folks like the Vermont Employee Ownership Center step in and work with those selling owners. CFNE, we come in late. We work on behalf of the worker co-op. So what we do is in the process of making that conversion. Oftentimes, to make the financing work, you use a few different things. So one layer is in cooperatives, you have the initial share purchase. So employees will purchase a share of the business, usually for a set amount. The conventional wisdom used to be set your share price to the price of a good used car. So it's flexible. You know, what's a good used car to you versus a good used car to someone else. But set your share price so that it can be meaningful. So if a good used car is $5,000 to $10,000 and you have 10 to 20 employees, you're talking real money. You know, you're talking a couple $100,000 potentially raised from the employees. That takes some effort to do. $10,000 isn't nothing. It really shows that these employees have some investment in the business. But that won't get you all the way to your company purchase price necessarily, depending on the size of the business. So the next step, we love to see seller financing, because what it shows is that the seller, who in this case is the outgoing business owner, believes in the business and trusts the employees to be able to execute on it. It shows that long-term trust and support. Yeah, exactly. It shows that the outgoing owner, you know, you're not trying to drop something and run. That you're not taking something that you're worried is a failing business, chucking it on someone else, making it someone else's problem and running away. What you're doing is you're ensuring that long-term stewardship of a really quality asset. And we like to see seller financing. Oftentimes, seller financing can come in at terms or with a level of flexibility that we as a loan fund can't, and that's fantastic. If we're able to join in on a project like that, that's fantastic. But oftentimes, seller financing can make the whole thing work. You know, you see outgoing business owners that are able to seller finance a sale, and that's your retirement income. Every year you get a check from the business. It's the business that you spent your time and effort growing, and now your previous employees are running it, and they're paying you year by year. You know, there's tax implications, there's tax benefits to doing it that way. And that can be a really powerful sort of annuity in your retirement. We'll also see things like outgoing owners get board seats at the new co-op or advisory positions, so you can still have some sort of input into the running of the business. A pattern that we're seeing at the Cooperative Fund is we're seeing successful worker ownership conversions where the selling owner maybe kept the real estate that the business operated out of. And then 5 to 10 years down the line, the worker co-op has been successful. They have a bunch of cash saved up, and they're able to go back to that owner and say, hey, we're ready to buy the building. We bought the business 10 years ago. We've been running it. It's grown. It's healthy. We have this great position. We'd like to take this off your hands, and that's an additional potential layer of income in the owner's retirement. But in cases where we're working through a conversion and the co-op needs other financing, so you have sort of your share purchases, you have seller financing, but there's a gap there. That's one way that CFNE can step into the picture. So at that point, we work with the worker owners, we work with the co-op, and we try to figure out how much money you need to purchase this business, if it's a fair price, if your business can sustain the debt payments on that, and we'll work to figure out the right financing package for you. We can be really flexible. We're not a bank. One of the benefits of being a CDFI, a Community Development Finance institution, is that we can be more flexible on terms. We have a broader the regulations allow us to be more flexible in terms of how much we can lend to the business in order to purchase it. And we really try to come in on behalf of the co-op. We oftentimes will push workers to go back to their selling owners and say, hey, we think you might be overpaying for this. You should talk about that purchase price a little bit. So there is a bit of a dynamic, but really at every step we come in on behalf of the co-op. We want to make sure that we're supporting the long-term health of the business.
So in terms of, because I'm so grateful to have you, because you're really breaking the layers, and I'm also like learning a lot. I wanted to ask in terms of the gap. So you've done the share purchase, the seller financing, and CFNE is coming right at the end, like you rightfully say, with the loan, right, which is flexible, might be patient as well. So if you're to describe like maybe or two cases that can come at the top of your head, in terms of just giving the audience that we're talking to more information on, okay, so this one was just a loan for, you said the list is around 10,000, if I heard you correct, to 2 million, which is quite, it's huge range. What are we talking about in terms of the terms of that loan? Yeah, so if you can talk in a little bit more about that.
And then
What transpired in those 3 case studies that you can think of, or 2?
do you want to focus just on conversions, or do you want to talk about
That's a good question. Maybe let's do conversions.
Sure.
Today, let's do conversions. Because startup, I think.
That's a very different. Yeah, it's very different world. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of CFNE's financing, the lower end tends to not be as relevant for conversions. So we'll talk about conversions specifically. Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of recent conversions. There was a business. I'm gonna be a little bit vague because I haven't talked to them directly.
Keep confidential.
Got to keep lender confidentiality. But there was a service-oriented business that has been in operation for 2 to 3 decades. They have about 10 employees and an outgoing business owner. Together, they started by going through the process of getting a valuation. That's step 1. And these are things that VEOC can help you with. Your local small business association, SBA, your local small business development center, SBDC, can help. There's a whole world out there to support small businesses, even outside the co-op movement, and a lot of them bring really valuable skills to something like a conversion. So there's in this example, they got a valuation through the local SBDC. The valuation they got wasn't one number. When they got the valuation, it was an Excel document that listed about 4 or 5 possible values for the business, ranging from about $200,000 to about $1.2 million. So there's a huge range there, right? I think the price they ended up settling on. So it's a negotiation process like any other. And it's a negotiation between the worker co-op that is just incorporated and the outgoing owner. They ended up settling on a business value of around $700,000. Okay, about 10 employees. They decided on a share price of $10,000. That was fair. So again, about $100,000. So now you got to make up $600,000. The selling owner was willing to seller finance about $300,000. And CFNE came in for about $300,000 on the conversion, plus a $200,000 future line of credit. So let's talk about that a little bit. What that means is the business, as it had functioned, the outgoing owner had maintained about a $200,000 line of credit with his local bank, and he used that over the years, sometimes to support payroll during lean times, other times to stock up or make investments in the business in preparation for a larger project that was coming down the pipe. And that really enabled the business to succeed. So what we were able to do was we stapled these things together. We said, okay, here's $300,000 roughly for the purchase of the business. And then also, here's a line of credit that you can draw on in the future. Our process, we try to be as friendly and flexible and responsive as we can. If you need to draw from that line of credit, really just email me, call me, I'll talk to you. Part of our loan requirements are that you keep sending us updated financial information every quarter. So that's a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. We require that to be submitted every year. There's a couple of other requirements around sort of insurance and things like that. But as long as you do that and you're running the business in a prudent way, when you need access to that $200,000 line of credit, email me. We'll get you that money between 3 to 5 business days, to the best of our ability. And what that enabled the co-op to do is sort of start on good footing. You purchase the business. So again, about $300,000 came from CFNE. Another $300,000 came in seller financing. That actually came on slightly better interest rate, at a slightly better interest rate than CFNE was able to provide at the time. The selling owner came in at around, I think, 5.4%, and then we were around 6%.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. Yeah, but oftentimes our interest rate fluctuates a little bit. This is a bit of a tangent, but I'll go down here. Yeah, so especially so we're recording this in 2023, where interest rates have raised dramatically in the past 18 months. We're coming off years of essentially like zero or very low interest rates. And in that environment, CFNE sometimes comes in above what you could get at a bank or a credit union. You know, you may be able to, you know, in 2020, you might have been able to find a loan for 3% at a bank, and CFNE would have come in at 5.5% or 6%. But now in 2023, you're seeing bank rates of 8, 9, 10%, and CFNE is coming in at 6, maybe 7. So we are less sensitive to interest rate fluctuations, but that can be both good and bad, and it really depends on the timing. It's hard to foresee. But we can go back to that example. So in the example we were just talking about, a service business, $700,000 valuation. They had about $100,000 in shares, $300,000 in a seller's note. I think that was over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. But really, we see anything from 3 to 10 years. Very patient. Yeah, and that sort of overlaps with our comfort zone too. And we'll amortize stuff from 2 to 10 years comfortably. It really, we can be very flexible. And we want to make sure, again, that we're supporting the long-term success of the business. And you can always change it, you know.
That's a good example, though. Yeah.
3 years out, if your business is going great and you have a 10-year amortization and you show up and you say, we want to pay off our balance, we have that much in cash, great. That's fantastic. We can roll that money into our loan fund and lend it out to other co-ops. We're happy to do it. Likewise, if you're 3 years in and suddenly those debt payments are feeling a little onerous, talk to us. We're happy to make adjustments.
Great. I like that because I was talking to an employee-owned company, which they had been around like for a couple, maybe decades actually. And one of the lessons that was coming out of that conversation was around they initially felt huge financial risk because the business itself was not as diverse. So it's a mechanical engineering company. So they were like in only producing one particular whatever for that particular sector. So the loan payments became very onerous, and they even at one point started discussing how, what's going to happen and so on. But the point there is, even with employee-owned companies or worker co-ops, the business, the technical as well as the business itself also has to be competitive and actually be very productive. Otherwise, if you are being financed, even if it's patient capital, the interest rates you're still going to feel like you're choking a little bit. Yeah. So it was very important to have them start to look at diversifying. So now they're into more sectors, producing for different, diverse clientele. Yeah. So I wanted to say, even if the seller is also, participating in this conversion, there's a lot there for me, because if you know that it's really a good business, then you are going to put your skin in the game. Yeah, just revisiting some of the things you were saying.
Yeah, that's a really good segue, actually. So, if you're thinking about employee ownership, don't lose sight of the fact that you're running a for-profit business. You know, it's really important. This is not a charity. It's not a nonprofit, and it's something that requires sort of a long-term strategic business sense to do and manage. And that's one of the many hats that an exiting owner has usually played in these small businesses. And now it's up to the co-op to do it. So it's up to the folks at the co-op to step up and realize, to understand what business they're in, to understand the long-term implications of being in that particular line of business, and to innovate. You know, I personally have seen many examples where you have a really small business that gets sold, and then the employees notice that there's this obvious thing that they could have been doing. And that ends up being a bigger chunk of revenue than other things. But the opposite also happens. You know, sometimes there are businesses where you have a exiting owner that has really just sort of stayed in their niche. They do their thing, and the co-op starts, and the co-op is sort of at the mentality of like, we'll just keep doing this one thing, and it's a diminishing niche, and we're just going to make our money and then retire, which can be fine as long as you do it with eyes wide open. But we really love to see those examples of flourishing growth after an employee ownership conversion. And there really are a lot of examples of places that, when you're able to take advantage of the skills that all of your employees are bringing to the table and not just the business owner, it really can unlock a lot of potential and a lot of potential growth in the business.
That's good. Yeah, and I love how you said it's like a great segue. But before we wrap up on like sort of the services that a partner to VEOC like CFNE brings to the table, so I'm sure if I could wrap up and say you funded very successful conversions, but also maybe not so successful conversions. And if you are to look at that, maybe from a perspective of the loan performance of your current loan book, and just say, what are some of the challenges? Because we also need to, not all, not all conversions will be successful, or even startups, co-op startups. What are some of the issues there, the ones that you have been involved in?
Sure. So CFNE as an institution has never lost investor money, which in some ways speaks to the success of the businesses that we fund, but in other ways says maybe we should be funding riskier businesses. That's a real point. Worker ownerships generally are very stable, because the type of businesses that are able to successfully convert to employee ownership are businesses that have stable revenue year over year. By and large, the worst case is they sort of maintain at their current level, which is also fine. We see, I think a more typical case is that you see either a little bit of growth or potentially new business lines occur. That we see that far more than a declining scenario with conversions in particular. Startups are a different question. Startups are riskier. You know, it doesn't matter what your ownership style is, whether you're employee owned or a sole proprietor or a partnership, whatever your business governance model is, startups are a risky business. And we see more startups are a risky business. And so what we've seen is with cooperative ownership, with cooperative startups, we try to be as flexible as we can, and we try to work a lot with the folks that are working on the startup to make sure that we're setting you up on the best path possible. what that means is, one, not leaving that startup undercapitalized. One of the really tricky things about startups is that there's some problems that can get better when you have more money.
Yeah.
When you're able to buy that piece of equipment, when you're able to hire that person with the specific skills, that there is a risk to being undercapitalized in a startup. Another way is to make sure you're not burdened with too much debt. So those are the things that we're trying to balance.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we're trying to balance. And also in a startup, there's a more fundamental question of whether debt is right for you. Maybe you'd be better off trying to raise money from friends and family that's equity-like, or change your share ownership, or figure out a way of getting equity-like money into the business that could be more successful for you. It's hard to say without knowing the specifics of the business. Did that answer your question?
Okay. Very well. So now we're gonna move on to. So you told me in the past that you also. I'm like, Vikas is so lucky. He has worked for an employee-owned company before moving to CFNE, and just a little bit about your experience on that, and we'll
so
that.
prior to working at CFNE, I worked at an employee-owned ESOP software company. Great business. I have a lot of friends that are still there. And truly an example of a business that flourished after an employee ownership conversion. There was a small company of about 40 people before going employee-owned. And in those years, I believe now it's up to about 600 people. And there's, depending on how you count, 2 to 3 new lines of business that are bringing in solid revenue, and truly a success story of an ESOP. I liked it a lot. It was a great group of people. One of the fundamental differences between an ESOP and a co-op that comes up a lot is the level of involvement in governance. So in co-ops, each worker owner owns a share, and there's one member, one vote in governance decisions. In an ESOP, you can do that, but you don't have to. It's sort of up to the business to decide what level of governance input and strategic input they want from owners, from owner employees. You can have ESOPs that run basically the same as a privately held sole proprietor. You can also have ESOPs that run very democratically and have lots of input in decisions. And there's a whole range. My experience with an ESOP was fantastic. I don't think most people realize the level of wealth generation that can happen from a successful business. Small business ownership really can be a path to transformative generational wealth. Employee ownership may not get you to that same level of generational wealth because you're spreading it across your employee base, but it can really generate a lot of broad-based wealth and prosperity in the community of owners. And that has been fantastic to see. I've been very lucky to be a part of a successful ESOP business. And that's one of the things that kind of sent me down this path personally of working with employee ownership, is seeing the impact of what employee ownership can do. And personally, I like working with co-ops. I like working with ESOPs, and working at an ESOP is something that's enabled me to spend more time working in the world of employee ownership.
Yeah, and that's why, I specifically wanted to chat to you because sometimes in employee ownership sort of world, or there's this sort of, it's not a divide, I don't know how best to describe it, where one tends to be favored over the other one. But you demonstrated to me from the get-go that, employee ownership in whatever form, as long as it's suited for that particular business and, whatever other aspects or mission values, then it's going to work. And I liked that balanced view. And also because you're a financier, right? For you, it's about, the business revenue is growing, what's going on.
Do the numbers make sense?
Yeah, do the numbers make sense?
Yeah. That's the fundamental question.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of employee ownership, now we're also seeing some interest around employee ownership trusts as a possible model. I don't have personal experience with that, but it makes sense. ESOPs are a quirk of our retirement law in the U.S. They wouldn't exist.
I agree.
Yeah. They're weird and they're hard to explain.
Get your head around, yeah.
But it is one way of building transformational wealth in an employee-owned business is through an ESOP. Yeah. The ESOPs also, because they are retirement policies, come with a lot of regulatory overhead and a lot of expense. You have to do your audits every year, and it may not make sense to saddle an employee-owned company with that annual expense unless it's above a certain size. So, I talked to Matt once, and Matt Kropp. I asked him. I said,
Director of Vermont Employee Ownership. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to Matt, the ED here at Vermont Employee Ownership Center, and I asked him, what's the size difference between the folks that you steer towards cooperatives and the folks that you steer towards ESOPs? And he looked at me and he said, what's CFNE's loan max? And it's funny, but there's some truth to it. We tend to see the smaller business becoming co-ops and the larger businesses becoming ESOPs. There's tax implications and tax benefits to being an ESOP that you really can only take advantage of once you're above a certain size. Yeah. And there's regulatory stuff that comes with it, and there are regulatory advantages to being a co-op instead of an ESOP. But also in terms of the level of involvement in the business, it's easier to run a business that runs every decision through consensus meetings when you're 10 people than when you're 1,000 people. Yeah. Which is not to say you can't run a 1,000-person business on consensus, but you definitely need more well-developed governance policies. You need there's ways of setting that size of a company up for success in employee ownership, and often in the U.S. that may involve being an ESOP rather than a co-op. But there's no hard and fast rule. You can have huge.
One of the interviewees, and if you are watching the series, you could go back. It's with Debbie Olson. So she explains like ESOPs, worker cooperative businesses, and EOTs. Like she gives really a great summary and highlighting the similarities, the differences. But I think from a financier's point of view, it's really at the end of the day, for CFNE specifically, it's about the broad-based wealth sort of creation, and which is very contrary to like a capitalist model where it's all about shareholder maximization, shareholder wealth maximization. Yeah. So in thinking about that, and also maybe the future in terms of this worker of the future who's also an owner, who also values sustainable well-being. Do you still, besides you being in an ESOP and now do you think this is really like an alternative pathway towards that broad-based ownership?
Yeah, so one point of clarification. So at CFNE, we value and we support that broad-based ownership, but another key thing that we look for is democratic participation.
Oh, great.
We only fund co-ops, and you don't have to be incorporated as a co-op. Not every state has cooperative statute, but we do want to make sure that you are making decisions democratically. At the minimum, electing board members that are able to make governance decisions. So one of the key aspects of cooperatives, worker cooperatives, as we work with them, as we define them, is having one member, one vote, and a really broad-based, not just ownership, but democratic participation in the business. That's very key to how CFNE looks at these businesses. And I think that's important because when you have that level of employee participation in decision making, it forces the business to go to move in directions that fit with where employees want to go. And everything is political. The personal is political, and every decision you make is building towards the future that you see for yourself and for the people around you. And when you're in a co-op, you can make decisions both keeping in mind the long-term financial ramifications, but also what is the effect of this decision on the world around me, on my community, on my industry, on whatever it is. You can keep that broader view in mind as a member owner of a co-op, and have input in terms of how do you want to build your life? How do you want to build your business? What are the things that you are making, and what do they do in the world? You can think about that. You're not thinking about that every day. Yeah. That would be a lot. Most days you're just trying to get your work done and move on to the next thing. But it allows a business to really think about a broader impact in their community.
Wow, Vikas, wow, what a way to end. I'm like, I love all that you said, and it really comes down from what I'm getting from what you're saying is it's not only the sort of the growth aspect, which is the broad-based ownership, but it's also the democratic participation, which also speaks to a lot of sort of leadership development and what we really require, right? And in thinking about all those layers that you spoke about, so are we achieving our financial goals? Are we achieving our community goals, our environmental, right? Because right now we are faced with the ecological crisis, the climate crisis. And in thinking about all of that, and then, saying is employee ownership the correct or alternative pathway to take. Yeah. So I want to thank you, but before we end, maybe just tell us where people want to connect with CFNE, with Vikas. You heard him saying we always. I heard you saying you have let's talk about it type of policy, and let's always re-engage and assess and so on. So you can just summarize and encourage those business owners out there.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing to your list first, though. You mentioned environmental goals and social goals, but I would add equity goals.
Yes, awesome.
Yeah, both in terms of societal equity, but also racial equity in particular. It lets you employee ownership. You can steer that ship in a few different directions. And you sort of take in the environment that you're in and look at the trade-offs and try to assess what direction you want.
Wow, that's a good one.
So, I feel like I had something else that I wanted to say.
I know why, because you really wanted to make sure the equity goes.
Yeah.
I love that, because I was just jotting what you were saying and it in mind. So amazing, I love it. But you can sort of wrap up and tell us where people can get assistance, including the VEOC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vermont Employee Ownership Center is a great resource. You can contact me at Vikas at coopfund.coop. That's VIKAS at COOPFUND.coop. You can also just Google us. But I want to leave you with a thought. There's a sort of tension a lot of times in the cooperative world, because you get people that are coming to the business world with a fundamentally anti-capitalist approach, and there's a lot of tension in that. because we live and work in a capitalist society, and that's how our business functions. And I want to encourage folks to not shy away from the idea of building a robust revenue and profit into their future goals, because that profit is what enables your business, what enables your organization to keep doing work. So have your mission, have your vision, know what you want, what part you want to play in the future of your community, and then build that business so that you have that profit, that ability to stay in the game, and to work towards that mission. It takes both. You have to keep your eyes on what you want in the world, but also stay focused on running the business in the day-to-day to enable you to be here tomorrow. And I would encourage all worker owners in general, employee owners of businesses, people considering employee ownership, reach out to the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. They're a truly fantastic resource. If you want to contact me, you can also just search for the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. We're active throughout New England and upstate New York currently. Who knows where that'll lead in the future. But for existing worker-owned businesses, for people looking at conversions, for resident-owned housing, and for food co-ops, consumer-owned businesses, we'd love to be a partner.
Thanks, Vikas, and thanks everybody for joining us. And please remember, this series has got 6 podcasts or conversations. If there's something that you didn't understand in this one, it might be in the next one, and so on. But thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Lizah.
You're welcome.